Hi there, and welcome to this Rethinking the Human Factor podcast, a show all about raising awareness, influencing behaviour, and fostering an appropriate organisational culture where security is truly valued. For our regulars, it's great to have you back on the show, listening into some of the insights that our guest today is going to be providing. For those of you who are new to the show, first things first, welcome. The second thing, what's the show all about? What's the format? Where's it come from? So, I guess the history behind the show is that about 6 years ago, I kicked off a piece of research which I called Rethinking the Human Factor. And it was really about trying to understand, why people do what they do when we've asked them not to do it. And as part of that research, I identified that actually the challenges that we face within information security around raising awareness and behaviour, influencing behaviour and fostering an appropriate organisational culture aren't unique to information security, cybersecurity. They're just not. The challenges of awareness, behaviour and culture are pretty prevalent across the whole of society. And it was with that in mind, and also, I guess, drawing upon my experience of setting up a project called the Analogies Project, that I understood that, there are a lot of people with a lot of experience, a lot of insights that have been doing this for a lot longer than many of us within the security industry. And wouldn't it be great if we could just get them to come to the show and share some of those insights? So that's pretty much what we did. We set out with a mission, which was to engage with people outside of the cybersecurity industry and to bring them in and to get them to share their insights. So, that's very much what the show is about. And then every fourth episode of the show, we invite one of our listeners to come on and to talk to us about what they've learned about the last three, and also to share their insights. So, if you're interested in doing that sort of thing, if you think, hey, do you know what, I'm learning stuff from here, but I've got stuff I want to share, then you can come on the show. We'd love to have you on the show. And the best way to do that is to drop me an email at podcast@re-thinkingthehumanfactor.com. That's right. Let me just repeat that for you. That's podcast@re-thinkingthehumanfactor.com. Drop us an email. Get in contact. I'd love to hear from you. And it'd be great to see we can schedule in to share what you've learned from listening to the Rethinking the Human Factor, and also what insights from your own experience you think the community would love to hear. So what are we up to today? Well, the guests that we've got on the show today, I think, for me, one of the main reasons behind why I wanted to get them on the show is that when I was introduced to them, they have an absolute focus upon people, but within a specific age bracket. And they're talking about people like children at really informative years, and about understanding, I guess for me as a parent, one of the things I want to do is to install or embed great positive behaviours in my own children. And I think that's pretty common across nearly all parents. And this is one of the things that our guest actually works upon, and they've done a lot of work in that area. Their journey getting to that has been a really interesting one. And so when I first was introduced to them and I listened to them and looked at their the materials they produce and the work they do, I was like, wow, this could be really interesting. So I think for a start, for me, it was the case that these people deal with an age bracket that, okay, it's not the traditional age bracket for cybersecurity professionals, looking at employees. But for those of us who are looking at the broader awareness and behavioural aspects of cybersecurity across society, this is an interesting podcast. I think the second thing is that from my own work, when we speak to clients, one of the key things when people talk about organisational culture, one of the things that gets neglected is the fact that most people have got their cultural values already embedded with them before they start work. And that's been done in those formative years of childhood and adolescence. And so, again, this guest, I think, was able to contribute to childhood and adolescence and the values and forming values at that point. So, I wanted to get them on the show. So, without any further ado, let's get on with the interview. Hi, Todd. Thanks for coming on the show.
Well, it's good to be here, Bruce. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolute pleasure. Absolute pleasure. And it's sunny over there, isn't it?
It is today. Thank goodness. We've got a lot of rain, which is not normal for us. So I'm accepting the sun while I have it this year.
Good. Yeah. Well, once you finish with it, can you send a little bit over here?
Yeah, because I'm here. I'm sure none of your listeners want to hear me complain about the sun.
No. Anyway, Todd, it's really interesting. I mean, it would be great if you could just explain to our listeners the journey that you've been on and the mission that you're now on in relation to the Max Ryan's books. And could you just give us a quick overview?
Wow. Well, that's going straight to the jugular because it's not a quick overview. I got to wrap my arms around how to shorten this up as much as possible. The first thing I guess I would say is I am not the poster child for being an author. And by that, I mean, I just could not stand English class in school. I hated it. Prepositional phrases, adverbs, verbs, all this crap. I'm like, I hated it with a passion. And I was never a big reader either. And so it's just ironic that this is the path that was happening. But it really started in 2006. In 2006, and if your followers believe in God or a higher power or the universe, it doesn't matter what you call it. But for me, it was I asked God to give me something else to do with my life, but I had no clue as to what I wanted to do. None. Right. So I just basically gave it a blank slate and said, okay, whatever. I had my own business, beautiful wife, 3 wonderful kids, a dream house. I mean, we had everything that most people would want, except I had this strange inner knowing inside of me that somehow I just knew I could have more impact on a lot more people. But I had no clue what that meant, and I had no direction. So I just said, okay, well, let's just see what happens. And lo and behold, I ran into a book and then another and then another and then another. I became an avid reader virtually overnight and can't explain why. I then started, it was mostly, we'll call it self-help books, right? Things that change the way you think, basically things that help change your paradigms and your limited beliefs put on you by others.
Yep.
Then I started teaching adult groups in business offices because what I did in my insurance practice, I doubled it in 5 years, what took me 20 years to build. And I'm like, well, shoot, that was easy. I've got to teach this to people. More people got to know this.
Yeah.
So I was teaching business groups, and I started at 1, and before I knew it, I was at 4 offices teaching twice a month. So I was doing 8 classes a month for free.
Right.
And you become a way better student when you're the teacher. And as that was progressing, I had another strange feeling. It was like 2.5 years into it. I'm like, wow, this is really, and I would tell them in real time, the class, which was at a business office. So it's not like a classroom setting. It was more of a conference room setting.
Yeah.
But I would say, wow, I feel like I'm in training for something, but I don't know what it is. I mean, it was, these are real things, and I couldn't explain them. So anyway, it started dawning on me, adults are really screwed up. And I was one of them. I'm not casting stones. We're all screwed up in some way, Yeah. And so at the time I was coaching my tweens and teens, and we were winning championships. And I'm going, wow, this stuff, because I was teaching them thinking stuff. I was teaching them, look, you don't have to be the best. All you got to do is think you're the best. And so we were winning, and I'm like, wow. So anyway, from there, I wrote a book for teenagers. Okay. And then I created a website for teenagers because I thought, well, a lot of teenagers don't like to read. I didn't like to read. So I'm going to create a website so they have a portal to go to, which is little short snippets. Then I got another crazy idea. I guess I'll just say given to me, if that's what you want to call, coming from that blank slate. I created an animation video for kids with leukemia. Okay. Now, to preface here, I knew nothing about leukemia, and I knew nothing about animation. Okay. I'm a low-tech guy. And so I'm starting that project, and I'm like, God, what am I doing? I feel like I'm just on overload. And then Jackie drops on me, hey, why don't we write children's books? And I'm literally like, are you crazy? And I seriously did. I actually denied her. I said, no, I want to do things that are going to help people. And I ran into Dr. Bruce Lipton, his research, who I got from Wayne Dyer's research. And it was Bruce Lipton's, he's the world's leading authority on epigenetics. And right then.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. I thought I recognized the name from somewhere.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. That knowledge. Not everybody will read his stuff, but I was already well read in that field. And so as I dove into his, I'm like, oh my God, Jackie, you're right. We do have to do children's books. And here's why. So because I learned about, brain waves and how our genes are expressed. And I'm going, oh my God. So all my teen projects and even the leukemia, we got to go back further. So as we were kind of talking about earlier, as we were relating things to, security, a lot of good security is reverse engineered to figure out how these hackers get in. Mm-hmm. And so we were, in a sense, I was doing the same thing with what we were creating, because I worked on the teen book and the teen website, and I had to go backwards younger. The leukemia video was for kids that were younger. And then when I learned about epigenetics and brainwaves, I'm like, God, I had to go back even further. And that's basically how we ended up launching what are now, dubbed the world's first books that instinctively develop positive behaviors. And that's the key word, instinctively.
Instinctively, yeah.
And the instinctively part, the importance of that is 95% of our behavioral patterns are established by the age of 7. And it has to do with our brainwave shifting to an alpha frequency. I'm going to get a little sciencey on you here.
Okay.
So our brainwave shifts to an alpha frequency around age 7, and that's what locks and loads all of our beliefs, our limited beliefs, our truths, whether they're positive or negative, our knee-jerk reaction. So this is our family money problems, our family prejudices, our family depression, our anger management issues. All of these become our truths. This is our normal. So what Max Rhymes does, and the way we created it and how we did it, it provides a counterbalance to that. So it provides the positive behaviors, so they become, at least a balance to create those knee-jerk reactions in a positive way. And they're scientifically proven to work.
Okay, so let me just sort of that. So it's 95% of our behavioral patterns are sort of established by the time we're what age?
7.
7.
And
right.
and there's no discrimination here. It's just due to brainwaves. So I liken it like this. This is the easiest way to explain it, especially from a security guy, right? So when you're born, dad goes to the hospital, picks up mom, brings home a brand new baby, right? Mm-hmm. Clean slate. There's no programs. There's no viruses. Yeah. It's just like going to the computer store, grabbing a brand new computer, laptop. You got no programs. You got no viruses.
Right.
You bring the baby home and you start, playing with it. It starts listening to your conversations. It starts listening to the news. It starts listening to the arguments.
Yep.
Programming's being downloaded, and so are the viruses. Yep. Same thing at the computer. You plug the computer in the internet, download programs. You download viruses. And what happens is around 2, so you're born in a delta. At around age 2, we move to a theta brainwave. Okay. And then, so that means it starts to speed up a bit. Okay. Still very low though. But the big change happens around 7 when we move to an alpha. And then it doesn't change again until around 12, 13, when we move to a beta. So it's crucial, those first 7 years. Absolutely crucial.
Right. Okay. This is really interesting because I think one of the things when, from my research, from a cultural perspective, and actually in the last interview we had with Gert-Jan Hofstede, and he's all about analysing culture. It's just mirroring what you're saying, but he's seeing it from a very, how cultures are formed and influenced and the importance of those early years. Whereas what you're adding there, which I'm not sure if Gert has ever mentioned. Do you know what? I'm going to ping him an email actually and ask him if he's ever heard this. All right. But that sense of, your brain is maturing. And as part of that maturing process, the brain waves, which are, I guess, pulsing through the brain, it might be one way of putting it. I don't know exactly how to put it. They change. And that certain brain waves are going to help embed behaviors more effectively than others or more thoroughly. That's really what we're saying here, isn't it?
Yeah, because so when you're at the very early stage, and let's go to age 0, let's go 3rd trimester, because a lot of parents don't even know that. 3rd trimester is when the brain is being developed. And
I'm going to stop you there. Trimester might, to some of our listeners, trimester is going to mean something, and to others, it's not. So just explain what we mean by trimester.
Okay, so the 3rd trimester means the last 3 months of pregnancy. Right. So just before the baby's being born. Right. And psychologists have done a study, and they had pregnant moms watch their favorite daytime soap operas. Right. Now, this is fun. This is actually funny. And after the babies were born, they played the theme song to the newborn babies, and the babies recognized the theme song.
And how would they recognize that? Is that something that they're monitoring brain activity, or is it just how they physically respond?
Physically respond. It's much simpler. The sucking sensation when they got a binky in their mouth. They're sucking, and as soon as they recognize something, they stop, and then they start again, and they stop. And so they've realized there's a pattern to recognition.
Right. Okay.
Really, really fascinating. So that's how they realize that. And because you look at, if you look at patterns in general in families, if there's an alcoholic in the family, there tends to be, an alcoholic growing up in the family. Mm-hmm. Money's probably the most popular topic. I don't like to focus on it, but people, do, right? Mm. And there's a reason 5% of the population controls 95% of the world's wealth, because wealthy people don't have a scarcity mindset. Poor people do have a scarcity mindset. And because of that, and you've learned that, even though when a baby's 0, people don't get this when they have conversations in the car, mom and dad are arguing about money, or they're in the kitchen or family. It doesn't matter what part. The baby's there. You don't think the baby understands because the baby doesn't understand. Mm-hmm. However, let's go back to the computer store analogy when you're bringing home that new laptop. And if you put in the word money or looked up the word money and put the definition next to it, that's going to be stored in your laptop forever. And when you want to draw that back up when you're 20 years old, you're going to pull up the word money and it's going to say, oh, money is very scarce. Money is hard to find. Bills are a pain in the butt. Yeah. And that's what we're doing to our children by default. Crazy.
Yeah. Okay. So at those early stages, a lot of the behavioral patterns, or they can be positive or they can be negative, are being formed at a very early stage as our brains are developing. So in relation to what is it you're trying to do with the books then, around trying to, if you understand that, how is it that you're using the book to help parents install positive behaviors? Because I think that, for our listeners, a key point there has got to be that actually the behavioral patterns that they're trying to address in the challenges around the human factor for cybersecurity could potentially have been embedded from such an early point. And it's almost a sense of, trying to get to grips with, one, that is a reality, and two, then, if you know that, what is it you can do to bring about changes in those behaviors so that they're more positive, shall we say?
Yeah, exactly. So the first part of the question, what do we create or how do we create the books, is probably the best way to answer that question. Mm-hmm. Because I was not interested at all. When I rejected my wife on writing the books, it's because I wasn't interested in writing cute books. Yes, the books have to be cute, and thankfully our illustrator nailed it. I mean, the kids fall in love with our characters. So It has to be cute. But again, I wasn't interested in cute. I was interested in change. And so the difference between children's books and the right children's books are not only what they say, but how they say it. So everything in our books are written in the present tense. Okay. So we are affirming a belief in the child. So nothing will be written, I wish, I want, someday, I can't, never. Everything is utilizing the power of I am. This is who I am. This is what I am. Yeah. So in every book, because some people will say at book signings, we'll get this, well, gosh, I can only afford 1 or 2 books, which is fine. But which one's the best one? Which one should I get? And I always jokingly answer it with, well, which core value do you not want to teach your child? And then it's like, oh, dang it, now I got to get all of them. And so, because that's how we created it. Each book is a different topic. Be responsible like Max. Just teaches personal responsibility, because I don't know how it is in the UK, but something is amiss here in the US when it comes to kids, because the parents have done so much for them, they have forgotten to do things for themselves. One is on gratitude. Another is on manners. Another's on daydreaming, which we nailed the timing of it, because all of a sudden, children's psychologists are saying it's become a lost art because there's too much screen time and not enough sitting under a tree and contemplating life and playing with bugs and sticks and rocks. Mm-hmm. And so what we did then is we took writing everything in the present tense. So it's an affirmation. We're affirming a belief, and we baked that into rhymes for the simplicity of memorization. There's only like 3 good rappers out there. There's like Will Smith, Eminem, and myself. And so
Do the others know that though? There's a new kid on the block.
No, the other irony is, part of this story is, I didn't even know I could rhyme. I mean, I kind of did. I used to mess around when my kids were little because you just rhyme stupid things. But it's just amazing how everything kind of came full circle in utilizing and kind of uncovering that gift of being able to rhyme, understanding how to write an affirmation. And now you'll love this, because I just heard this yesterday from a grandfather in Napa Valley, where all the wine is made here in California. And a buddy of mine had given him a set of books for the grandfather to give his 2.5-year-old grandson.
Right.
And just the other day, and I just got told the story yesterday, the grandfather takes the grandson into the ice cream store.
Right.
And there's a little girl there. So the grandson's 2.5, little girl's probably the same age. And I'm shocked because of how awesome it worked. But he goes up to the little girl and he says, "Hi, my name's Johnny. It's nice to meet you. Would you like some ice cream?" And those words are almost verbatim what's in our books. And she doesn't say anything. The little girl's startled, like she didn't know what to say. She's kind of paralyzed.
Right.
And so he responds with, "Oh, do you mean no thank you?" And the grandfather's like, "You've got to be kidding me." I mean, he's only had the books for like 10 days.
Yeah.
And that's one of probably the best testimonials we've got. And they're always in real time. We could never get them on video because they're always candid.
Yeah.
But we're constantly getting this kind of stuff. And it's music to our ears, because we didn't realize it was going to happen that fast. But these kids, they're learning because of their brain waves. They're learning at it's almost like being what do you call it? Meditative state. That's how they're learning.
Right.
Through what they call hypnotic learning.
Yeah. At
that age, they are learning hypnotically. They got, that's it.
Is that because they're more? Are children more in the present than adults?
Yes, but it has to do with brain waves again, because when we're born in a delta, we move to theta at 2 and then alpha at 7. So now let's take an adult. When you meditate, you're attempting to get into alpha. And if you're really good, you can get into theta. And if you're a monk, you can get into delta.
Right.
And so think about somebody, they try to, hypnosis, when they try to get you to quit smoking, and it works. It's because they learned that through hypnosis. Well, these kids are walking around in a hypnotic state. Yeah. So everything is just downloaded as gospel. It is their truth. And so they just mimic it.
And you use that word truth, which is a really interesting one, because going back to conversations I've had with Hofstede, his dad originally back in the late 70s, early 80s, did a massive piece of research, and he identified these 6 dimensions for profiling cultures, and one of them is all around truth, and whether or not there is a single truth or whether or not there are multiple versions of the truth. And obviously, people are now talking about, the media openly talks about this idea of there is multiple versions of the same truth.
Of course.
Yeah. And there are certain cultures where the cultural value is that there is only one truth. And that gives certainty, and that certainty reduces anxiety, which has an impact upon the brain in terms of less anxiety. I mean, if you have too much anxiety, you get cortisol. Cortisol basically helps redirect the blood from system 1 to system 2 in the brain. So instead of cognitively thinking things through, you're just basically gut instinct, knee-jerk reactions using your biases. And you're like, okay, so if you get cultures which are more aligned to that, then could that mean that people aren't necessarily cognitively thinking things through so much? So that's from I think it's what they call certainty avoidance. So there is only one truth. At the other end of the scale, there is this thing where they go, okay, actually, culturally, people within this cultural profile, they're open to the idea that there are multiple truths, which means that they're happier with uncertainty, which means that that they suffer more, they probably suffer less anxiety with uncertainty around them. And you keep coming back to truths, and I'm like going, oh, is there some sort of connection going on here with what kids are going through at that really early stage? Gert-Jan Hofstede would probably say to me, yeah, there is, Bruce. Absolutely. This is the reason why, from a cultural perspective, everybody says these are the most informative years which set down your cultural values and the values and the behaviours that you have. So this is really, for me, I'm just like, oh man, this is really this is bringing an end to a loop. You know how you get those things where you're going through that thinking process and something sticks out and you're like, in theory, I could see this. And then you have a chat with somebody, you read something else and you go, oh, that's just closed the loop.
Right. Yeah. And the funny thing is, now, in fact, let's go back to that closed in the loop, because Jackie and I, we didn't really write these books for the kids as being kids. We wrote the books for the kids as being adults. Does that make sense?
Hold on. I'm trying to compute that. I tell you what, let's take a shortcut because my computing processing power suddenly has been disrupted. You explain to us what that means, and I'm going to write down the answer.
So in other words, my concern wasn't as big. It wasn't a big a deal to create a kid with manners, although that's part of the process. It's part of the process. But the whole point was the end result. The end result is we need to produce happier, more productive, balanced people in society, and those are adults. So that goes back to the reverse engineering, why we did went all the way down to the lowest level of age 0, to age 7, was to produce happier adults, because when they're happier adults, guess what? You don't need as much security. You don't need to worry about your house being broken into. You don't need to worry about the internet thieves and stuff like that as we get more and more of people in the masses being happy. The only reason people steal is because it's their truth, that it's their normal, right? They think it's okay. Let's go back to truth. That's their truth. They actually believe that it's okay.
When you say that, and I can see where you're coming from for that, when you say that it's okay, is it also that it's not just that it's okay to do something that you're not supposed to, whether it be to steal, to create a piece of malware and to infect computers all around the world and to disrupt businesses, all that type of thing. But it's sort of sometimes that they justify why it's okay. So there's okay because that's what everybody around me in my life has been doing, or, the key influencers have done. But also there's a case of it's okay because I can justify it. That's right.
And if you're hanging out with a bunch of hackers, that's all your conversation is all day long, is with a bunch of hackers. If you're hanging out with a bunch of entrepreneurs that want to make a difference, or a bunch of philanthropists that want to make a difference in the world, then those are the conversations you have. So your truth is always, formed by the top 5 people that you hang out with.
No, that's really interesting, because I was going to ask you a question. There's if you hang out with hackers, if you hang out with entrepreneurs, but what about the impact of, you're hanging out with people at work? And, so there's the behaviours and the values that you bring to an organisation in your job role when you first join the company or whatever it is. And then there's the truth within an organisation. Can you have a different truth in the organisation to the truth on the outside? It's almost like there's a dichotomy between the values you learn and you are that are embedded with you when you're younger, and then you get to an organisation where you're suddenly surrounded by people who might not come from the same culture, might have different truths, versions of truths. I just wondering if you have a view on that. That maybe it's the 5 people within your department and the effect they have on you.
That's exactly right. And it is normal. And yes, it can work, and let's just say it does work. However, birds of a feather do flock together. So typically what will happen is, especially if you got a small group and there's one bad apple that just doesn't fit in there, they'll end up getting rid of that bad apple. They'll find somebody that's got the same feathers as they do, so they can move in the direction, and start flowing downstream together, so that way there's not one person trying to go upstream.
Yeah.
It all interblends, and part of, I mean, there's so much of this behavioral science and even, neurons and epigenetics that are involved with Max Rhymes.
Yeah.
Because it's about creating something inside the child. I'm going to go back to what I said earlier, instinctively. So that way, maybe because we're dealing with their environments, right? I mean, let's face it. We created a foundation, the Max Rhymes Foundation, where we adopt elementary schools. So we go to the kindergarten age, and we provide in 30 schools in each of these 15 targeted cities, which are just the 15 largest cities in the United States. We're going to provide full sets of books to every child in those kindergarten classrooms to take home as their own, because we have no way of changing their environment on the outside, the house they grew up in, the street they grew up in, with the gangbangers and the violence and all of this.
Yeah.
But if we can change their environment on the inside to instinctively give them different ways of thinking while they're young and in that hypnotic state, as they do become adults, they might choose a different path. Maybe that one thing they hear in a movie, or it might be that coach or that teacher at school, might be able to turn them. And so there's a lot of that is part of this Max Rhymes process. I mean, because this is a long journey. We didn't write these to be kind of one and done. This is a long process, because it's a long behavioral study to see if we can have long-term impact on the vast majority of children out there.
And are you doing anything in terms of measuring the effectiveness of these? I mean, you've got the foundation. You're working with 15 schools in was it 15 or 30 schools? I can't remember.
30 schools in each of 15 cities.
Okay. So are you doing anything with those cities to actually measure the impact on this? Because really, what you're talking about is it's influencing behavior, isn't it? And going back to the point you were making earlier, what you're looking for is, it's obviously about children, but it's also about children, just one part of that stage. Children that turn to adults. So it's about actually creating, good, well-rounded adults that behave in a particular way. And you're sort of like, okay, so you're targeting the children. So I'm sort of interested it is a long journey, but are you doing anything around measuring this at all?
So the yes and no. The yes is yes. The no is it's a work in progress. So we don't have any metrics as of yet, because we're just piloting. The first city we're piloting right now is in Oakland, right. Which for some of your people, that is right across the bay of San Francisco. Okay. So there's kind of three of us. There's San Francisco, there's Oakland, and there's San Jose, and we're all on the edges of the bay.
Right.
So Oakland's got a big inner city issue, and so the feedback we're getting is so far is from parents and teachers.
Okay.
Now, we've got a 13-year journey is what our metric system is going to cover. And that's because it takes 13 years from a kindergartner to become a senior in high school before they go off to college.
Oh, okay. Yep.
And what we're going to do as well is after we want 3 touches on these kids. The first is kindergarten. Dr. Bruce Lipton and I are in communication on creating another book series. We'll call them tweeners, for that 12-year-old, 10-year-old, probably somewhere around 3rd or 4th grade. Mm-hmm. Then we want to touch these. And the easy thing about that is they're in the same school, right? Kindergarten, 3rd, 4th grade, same school. And then as those schools feed into the local high school, we want to touch them one more time. Right. The metrics will be in that 13th year, and probably get better and better over time, because as these kindergartners move up to 1st grade, then go to 2nd grade, then go to 3rd grade, if you're able to saturate 13 years of kindergarten classes, now I think we've made some change. But it's a work in progress. No one's ever done this before. It's the first project of its kind.
Yeah, and then I think you have to have those projects, don't you? And then they produce better, because when people talk to me about metrics, and I say, well, what metrics have you got? And they go, oh, we've got no metrics. And I say, look, it's better to have some metrics than not. And one of the things, you speak to anybody whose job is all about metrics, they'll make it very clear to you, like, the metrics aren't 100% accurate. the whole idea about metrics is that it moves you further on in terms of your better understanding, and then you would use this piece of work then to, go test another theory using that data, and you move yourself and move society forward in that way. But I think the interesting thing is that you're pointing out it's a long period of time to have any meaningful sense of whether or not you've been able to change things. You're looking at a long-term strategy rather than anything short-term. And I think that's one of the challenges that a lot of our listeners have, is that they're asked to influence behavior, whether that be within the context of people within work, or even people outside of work in their own personal lives when it comes to anything to do with cybersecurity and privacy. And then we get put into this, and you've got to produce these metrics which are reporting on a quarterly basis, for example. How do you measure that around culture, for example, and behavioural change? And I think that's one of the challenges a lot of our listeners have, is almost winning the argument that actually the most senior stakeholders within organisations and governments need to be looking at this on a much more longer term view, and need to be measuring progress on that longer term view as well. So that's a significant challenge.
It is, and because we're impatient. Humans are impatient, and we've grown to be more impatient the better and the faster technology gets. But one thing we do know for sure is that self-esteem is at an all-time low for kids today, an all-time low. And it plummets further for low-income kids. And this is not just a U.S. phenomenon. This is worldwide. And going back to what I mentioned earlier, like when I did the teen project and the teen website and the leukemia video, and I needed to do those to get the max rhymes.
Yeah.
But the irony is I'm going to end up going back to the teen website and the teen book as these kids move up, because that's ultimately part of the big picture with the foundation. So it's funny how the paths lead. And this is, this has already been a 13-year journey since I asked that question of give me something else to do with my life.
I think one of the things that comes from this, and you mentioned it a little bit earlier, is just, you start at one point, you're thinking about what the challenges are, for adults, adult behavior in a way. And then you as you start to examine adults, you then start to push back, and it's almost like this continual root cause analysis. I often say the 5 whys that I use, why, and then somebody answers a question, and I go why, and I just keep pushing them back. And actually, it's a similar thing when I was looking into the human factor. I started off at a place, at assumptions that we were making, and then I moved slowly back. And then I got into this point where I was like, oh man, I'm going to have to look at physiology. I'm going to have to look at neuroscience. I'm going to have to look at, judgment and decision making. The fact that you can make somebody aware, whether that through some form of communication or even a book, you can write it all down in there. You can communicate the information. They might remember it. There are ways of helping them remember it. And then the next point is, okay, but even if they do remember it, are they going to be inclined to actually act on it in the way that you're trying to get across? And it's when you keep going that you suddenly get to the point where you go, there's a whole load of stuff which is going to have an impact upon the thing that I want. In your case, it was, you talk about the adults, and you're like, if I don't look at that, if I don't plan for it, and your journey is that you've gone all the way back, and now you're moving all the way back forward with what you've learned on that journey, then the likelihood that you're going to achieve the end result is going to be limited. And I think that your story is an interesting sort of reflection for me upon that. I've got a question for you. Yeah. Was there a particular reason why you decided to do one value per book?
Yeah. I don't know if it wasn't really a scientific thing. It was more that we weren't interested in telling stories. They're not storybooks, although it goes through Max and Molly, his sister, through the day from typically morning at night, but not always. So it was just kind of hammering home a theme. So for instance, let's go to the daydream with Max and Molly. First thing they do when they wake up is they meditate. I don't use the word meditate though. I use daydream. What's the difference? Nothing. But I don't want to scare people off. And And then when, Max walks into Molly's room, she's still doing her dreaming. Now you can tell they're doing their meditating because they're sitting up in bed, resting against their pillow, against the headboard instead of lying down. Okay. Right. And then they go throughout their day and then, and they sit under a tree a couple times and they contemplate and they dream about what they want to be. Molly wants to be a doctor. Max wants to be a teacher. And then I go all the way to the night. And the last thing they do before they fall asleep is they meditate again, daydream, if you will, on what it is they want. So it's through repetition. We all learn through repetition. The beautiful things is with kids is they learn so quickly. So it doesn't take them long to pick this up at all. That's the ice cream store example I gave you earlier. Mm-hmm. But so that's kind of how we chose that, and to have a certain theme in each book. I'm going to go back to what you mentioned before regarding the adults, and again, why I focused on it, because you kind of alluded on if you brought a book or some knowledge or some advice to another adult, would they actually take that advice and heed to it and start making a journey on their own? Well, the statistic is this, and this was scared the heck out of me. Only 1 out of 10 adults ever change their behavioral patterns. 1 out of 10. That's how hard it is, because the change has to come from within. It can't be forced upon. Anytime we try to force human adults to do something, we resist. And that interchange is extremely difficult. And again, it's just because behavioral, our truths, all of that are just locked and loaded at such early stages in life.
So in a way, I mean, one of the things that one of the people that I've read quite a lot of in the past, and I love his quote, Edgar Schein, and he has this quote which I think summarized how I looked at the challenges around the human factor so well, which is that you have to understand the forces at play to better design the environment within which people make choices. That's what he was basically saying. And I think you alluded to the point earlier. You were talking about creating an environment for children to make choices, to learn in, which will then influence their choices. I think about how my children read a book, and when they start reading a book, they really do close everything off. Sometimes you're talking to them and there's nobody in the sense that they're just not paying attention. They're so present and they're reading, and it's almost like you've created an environment. And actually, the book that I brought out, somebody was asking me, what was the book all about? And they thought it might be a tick list of this is what you have to do. I said, no, the book's just a platform. Yeah. I said, the book is a platform for the reader where we just basically throw some insights. There's 9 chapters, and each chapter has a core focus, and there is an insight. It's almost like a separate seed on each chapter, and the seed gets given to them, and then they can water it. And part of that process, funny enough, is about actually having time to daydream, whatever you want to call it. It's actually having time to step back. And I think most of our listeners, I know I do, I struggle with this as well. And people generally don't have a lot of time to sit back and let ideas ferment.
Well, yeah, they don't take the time to sit back and let ideas ferment. Yeah, because we all have 24 hours in a day. Yeah. And we have to quit making that excuse, because we're all, especially this generation, we're moving at hyper speed. And so it is imperative that we slow down. Now, I see, don't get me wrong. You try telling that to a single mom of 3 kids.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I get it. And we're not naive to think that, she's probably screaming right now, or when she hears this, he doesn't know what he's talking about. Oh, no, I get it. Let's just go with the masses, though.
Yeah. Okay. There's a book which was recommended to me by a gentleman I met when I was presenting over in Switzerland a couple of years ago. When he told me the title, he goes, I think you should read this. I think you'd really enjoy it. I was like, all right. And then he told me the title, and it's all about how to be idle. I was like, what? And I didn't know really what he was coming at, but he then explained to me the importance of idleness. Now, this was the chief exec of a very large organization. And I was like going, wow, okay. And he was explaining to me, and I was like, yeah, absolutely. And I went and bought the book, and I'd recommend it to any of the listeners, How to Be Idle. It's a really interesting book about the importance of, firstly, how we interpret idle. We interpret idleness as a negative thing.
Right.
And on a cultural level, especially in Western cultures, we see idleness as quite and that's a weakness. It's a misuse of your time. And this book actually is full of a really interesting history about how that term has developed culturally, but the impact that it's had. And actually, it's all like pointing out as part of that process of understanding, you go, well, actually, idleness, in the sense of freeing up your time to be able to ponder in many ways, and to explore things, and to sort of go down routes which aren't necessarily the norm, is one of the ways that we address some of the biggest challenges that we face in society. People would actually call those people thinkers, and a more positive thing would be like, these are real thinkers. But to do that, you need to use the time that you have to do that thinking process. So just talking to you, that sense of, I used the wrong term, I listen to you now. We do have the time. It's about prioritizing your time, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is about that. And I get it. Believe me, I'm right in the heart of Silicon Valley. I mean, everybody goes 100 miles an hour. I had to learn to be idle. I had to learn how to meditate. I had to learn to go take a walk, because I was raised by two workaholics. So what did I become? I became a workaholic. And running a business and doing all these projects, I mean, it was helter skelter. And I had to force myself, which is not good either. When you have to force yourself, because then it's hard to get idle quickly. It's like, it's like going on vacation and it takes you 3 days just to unwind.
So a final thing for us to sort of like flick through. And I think, this is close to your heart. Governments and some of the biggest stakeholders in the security industry are rightfully trying to educate children about the risks associated with the use of the internet. We all, there's a lot of good out there, okay, and there's a lot of benefit from the use of the internet, but there are risks that come with that. And so we are seeing, and we have been seeing for some time, a great deal of effort being made about how to engage with children. And one of the earliest actual guests that we had on the show was Heather and Chase from the Ninja comic. And they were trying to buck the trend in terms of how people were trying to engage with children. And so I was just wondering whether or not you have any views on that very specific engagement piece with children, and what you sort of notice out there, because I think it's one of the most important things for us to be looking at. It's a long game, but that doesn't preclude it from being one of the most important things we need to be focusing upon.
Right. And for multiple reasons, not just from, hacking of one's life, if you will, their identification and all of that, but hacking one's life internally because of children and because of the internet. Well, not because of children, but because of the internet, and its availability is so accessible, and so many parents are given their phones or iPads to the kids. Porn is being watched as early as 10 years old, and you can't unsee that. And so that changes you as a person, your behavioral patterns, and again, let's go back to your beliefs and your truths. So there's things that have to be done rapidly. And unfortunately, and you just mentioned it, there's a lot of good out there. And I'm a firm believer, there's way more good than there is evil and bad. There's way more. Mm-hmm. We're just seeing more bad because the population is larger. I firmly believe people are better than they used to be, on a whole. There's so much coming out in security, though. I mean, you probably heard about the quantum bits that they're doing now.
Yep.
And, with China, I think China's in the lead. What do they have, like 16 digits? And we have like 8 digits or something like that over here in the U.S. that they're up to. Things like that are going to make it harder, and it's going to make it safer for kids and everybody, quite honestly. Unfortunately, this little, we'll call it a 30-year period, I guess we'll say. We're 20 years back and 10 years forward, 30-year, the experimental time, people just stuck at the wrong place at the wrong time, depending on your age and depending on what happened to you from that.
Yep.
But we are going to get out of this, and security is going to catch up. And a lot of it, I think, is going to come from the quantum digits that they're doing, because something's got to give for these kids. There's no doubt.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, look, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the show. I just still remember that email where we had the introduction, and I was like, this is a really interesting. You're all about behaviour as a behavioural outcome. And the book is a mechanism for doing that. But the process, the journey that you've been on has been about understanding what the outcome is that you want, and then slowly making your way back, and then getting to a point where you're like, oh my God, I've gone a lot further back than I'd ever thought I was going to do, and learning about new stuff. And then you start coming back forward with that new stuff. And that actually is a really important lesson for our listeners. Don't be afraid to ask why, and to keep asking why until you get to a point. Because I think the thing that you can do, you've got the outcome you're looking for, you've then got a sort of a mechanism for demonstrating where you've come from to get to that outcome. And it's based upon understanding, going back to the beginning of this interview, understanding how brainwaves change as children develop, and how that then has this impact where 95% of those of the sort of behavioral patterns that we all have now, as an adult now, 95% of those patterns you're saying have been formed at a really young age, and that's all down to those brainwaves. And you're like, okay, so for me and for my listeners, it's like, have you gone that far? Have you thought about how the brain is processing information, how it, and how it's doing that at different stages? Because if you don't understand that, you're sort of missing the building blocks upon which people's behavioural patterns and the values associated with its behaviours are processing information that we're presenting to them when they come and join the organisations that we represent. And then we're like wondering why, when we design things, they aren't necessarily bringing around the behaviours that we want in the majority of people within the organisations. And I was kind of like, yeah. And I knew, I was like, yeah, from children to adults. That's where we will start. And some of us don't finish. They always say, I'll happily put my hand up that there is an inner child in me, okay, who's like sticking the hand up every now and then going, I want to be heard.
yeah.
But hey,
that's not a bad thing.
It's not a bad thing as far as I'm concerned. Right. Okay. Well, Todd, absolute pleasure. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you for coming and sharing, those insights with the listeners here at Rethinking the Human Factor. And what we will be doing, for all listeners out there, as part of the notes that come with the podcast, we're going to put the links there to the Max Rhymes work that Todd and Jackie have been working so hard on for so long. And I think it'd be really interesting, it's 13 years, but it'd be great to see, how these sort of approaches are bringing around the positive choices and changes that we're looking for in children as they grow up and they move towards the higher education. So thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks, Bruce.
Hi. Well, it's absolutely great to have Todd on the show. And Todd and I before we actually had this chat, we exchanged emails and we had a chat, and it was really, really clear that actually the depth of the work, the science behind the work that he's been doing is so deep and so broad as a result of the journey that he's been on, him and Jackie, that I was like, we're not going to be able to do this real justice in the space of an hour. But I really, really, going back to what I said was one of the reasons why we invited Todd on the show, I think it's really, really relevant. One of the biggest challenges that we do face within the industry is about organizational culture and about behaviors of people. And a key thing from the chat with Todd today is that a lot of our behavioral patterns and the values that underpin our behavioral choices really come as a result of our childhood and adolescence. And so that sort of, I guess, reinforces the need for governments and not-for-profits and even for the private sector to really seriously think about what is it that can be done to better equip children and adolescents in this changing world to enable them to make positive choices about security and privacy. And that's an absolute key mission here at Rethinking the Human Factor. And I know a lot of work is being done. And I do believe that it's great the work's being done. But I think the key thing here is about understanding how behaviors are formed and influenced at that point in time, and then designing programs with that in mind. I think that's a big takeaway for me from this particular chat with Todd today. So I mentioned in the conversation that we just had with Todd that, you know, he's got a whole range of books. So that if you go to the podcast meeting notes, you'll be able to find a link there, which will take them to the web pages where they make these books available. If you like the type of insights we've been talking about today, you know, really getting into the more of the behavioral aspects, but also tying in with the cultural aspects. And we even had a bit of the thing about physiology coming in there as well. If you like that sort of stuff and you're like, okay, this is igniting my imaginations and making me think, okay, is there a different way of approaching the challenges within our organizations? Then, you know, we'd love to share more with you. Okay. We really would like to share more with you. And I help people understand how these things work and get to the root cause of these things. And I do that through a variety of different training programs. And you can find those training programs at www.marmaladebox.com/training. And yeah, we're doing these programs not just here in the UK. We are trying to roll them out more broadly to Europe, North America, and we're really trying hard to do something down in Australia. So just watch that space. And in terms of sort of watching that space and keeping up to date with what's going on at the Rethinking the Human Factor, a number of ways you can do that. So the first thing I'd obviously recommend, if you enjoyed the podcast, is subscribe to the podcast, and you can do that via iTunes, you can do that via Spotify, you can go to the Marmalade Box /podcast page, and you can actually see there ways of subscribing to the podcast as well. Another great way to do it, something which we're seeing quite a few invitations now coming through, is that we actually do have on LinkedIn a Rethinking the Human Factor group. So you can request to join the group, and we can and then what we will do is when you join the group, we'll actually be able to see, you know, what are the things coming up in advance. So we give you heads up on who's coming on the show, other stuff that we're finding interesting, because a lot of what we do is continual research. So we're seeing other articles and blog pieces and research articles and papers which we think are very interesting. So we try to share something on a weekly basis with you as well, just to keep drip feeding you information. We'll also take the time, invest the effort to sort of keep you aware of what we're up to as well in the group. And then finally, if you're sort of interested in what we're doing at Marmalade Box around Rethinking the Human Factor and how we help people apply the lessons of Rethinking the Human Factor, the best way to do that is to go to the marmaladebox.com website and subscribe for updates. Right. Well, what podcast have we got next? Well, the next podcast that we have on the show is very, very much focused around culture and the role of semiotics. Now, we've had Rachel Laws on in series 1, and it was an incredibly popular show. When I do go and speak to people who've been listening right from the beginning, Rachel's podcast gets pulled out very often as being one that really ignited people's thought processes. So we asked if Rachel would come back on the show, and she was really up for it. So yeah, we've got another podcast with Rachel coming next, I believe, on the show. So it's been great to have you here. I always feel slightly sort of honoured in a way that, the listeners do spend some time, an hour and a half listening to the show. And so for me, it's always really rewarding to know that there are people listening to this out there, and there are people actually taking stuff away, and they're sort of using insights to maybe reshape how their organizations are looking at the challenges of awareness, behavior, and culture. If you've got anything you'd like to suggest to the show, then you can drop me an email at podcast@thinkingthehumanfactor.com. And just remind you can use that same email address, okay, if you want to come on a show as a listener and share some thoughts about what you've learned through the show, but also maybe what you've learned from your own experience of addressing the human factor. Thanks very much for joining us. I'll look forward to having you back here with us on the show soon.